Most breaches are caused by exploiting oversights in basic cybersecurity fundamentals, but complex hybrid multi-cloud infrastructures make cybersecurity hygiene challenging. Red Seal can help. It shows you what's on your network, how it's connected, and the associated risk across public cloud, private cloud, and physical environments. With Red Seal, you'll get control of your cybersecurity fundamentals so you can protect your organization from the inevitable attack vectors and reduce your cyber risk. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/Red Seal.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian and Jason Albuquerque. We are looking for high-quality guest suggestions for all of our podcasts to fill our Q3 recording schedule. Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and submitting the form. You might want to get their approval first, or you might want to let them know just so when we go to contact them after we review them, they realize where it came from. Also, learn how penetration testing reduces risk in our next live webcast with Core Security, a health systems company. Register for our upcoming webcast or virtual trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/webcasts. You can also access our on-demand library of previously recorded webcasts and trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, I'm trying, the news cycles in articles are getting a little closer to normal. We're not quite there yet. I tried to pull out all the ones that don't talk too much about the pandemic, but oh my gosh, the news cycle, it's so crazy. So much in there. The first article I pulled, and Jason, obviously I want your take on this one, but this article is interesting. Top 5 tactical steps for a new CISO. But I don't think this just only applies to a CISO. I think any executive or leader has to go through these 5 tactical steps in some form or fashion.
Oh, 100%. And man, did I go down some rabbit holes after reading this, right? I mean, the first one is know your business operational surfaces. And that's a rabbit hole that just mentally I went down. It's vendors, it's partners, it's client connections. I started looking at things like EDI connections and APIs to different applications. And then just take it out of IT, right? Take it out of technology, facilities, physical locations, merger and acquisition bleed over, all of these things that I've seen happen over the course of my career that could potentially be those business operational services that you have to identify and know.
It's just like trying to run the network at my house. I get some of the struggle, right? Because you've got business operations, such as you want your kids to focus on homework. Well, you can't just turn off the internet. In fact, you can't just filter certain things at certain times because they go to do their homework. Part of their assignment is to actually go to YouTube and watch a video. So you can't turn off YouTube, right? And you can't even do a great job of filtering YouTube, which is a totally, different subject. And you can't turn off, say, well, you can't use your phone. You can only use your Chromebook, because then some parts of the assignment are draw this out and take a picture of it with your phone and upload it into your Google Classroom, right? So managing security and homeschooling in today's age is, I think, some of the interesting things that have parallels into this first article.
Oh, big time. Yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously got to know where all your business assets, where your key critical systems are. We were talking about this in the last segment, because you want to make sure you put the right protections around some of those critical business assets. First, you got to know what they are, right? And then be able to apply a set of controls. And maybe some of those controls exist in your environment, but some of them may be new controls that you have to go out and get.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those scenarios we talked about in the previous segment, is you got to classify those assets, right? It's one thing to know what you have, but then being able to classify it so you know what level of risk that presents to your organization. I mean, that's huge in having conversations around budget and security program performance and all of these things that a security exec or an IT exec needs to be speaking to a board of directors or the CEO of the company about. Having that level of asset classification, I think, is critical.
Yeah, definitely. Because now you've got to figure out, okay, what do I have to do? What would I like to do? I mean, it comes back down to your point, budgets and resources and how you're going to articulate a strategy to your management, which potentially is the CEO or the board in this particular case, to say, look, here's what we know, here's where the criticality is, here's where I see some gaps. These are the kinds of resources and budgets I'm going to need to kind of fill this kind of gap in the short term, and then think about a longer range plan.
Right. Yeah, one of the big pieces I pulled out of this article too is know your resources that you have available, right? So, number one, the one thing I pulled a little off topic for the article, but I pulled out of it is know your business outcome, know the results you want, right? That way you can articulate it, and then you can start aligning budget and resources or partners or help from other business units to get that outcome achieved.
Yeah, agreed. The second article, this was a good article. It gets into a lot of Q&A with Teresa Payton. She's former CIO from the White House. I think she was the first female CIO for the government. And I pulled out one specific section of this interview that I thought was really, really interesting for people to kind of get their arms around, right? Are there ways CIOs can prepare for these kinds of cybersecurity threats? What are some cybersecurity risk mitigation strategies? And she had some really good recommendations in this section that I wanted to highlight because I think they're really good for folks in the current environment that we're in.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, I took a little whack at kind of, looking at this and putting it in my own practice. I took one piece of it is education. She had mentioned hold regular weekly or bi-weekly webinars with different safety tips. I kind of rolled it up as have a good communication strategy and a good education strategy, and I think it really will help your organization. We talked about it in the last segment as well, right? Where it's extremely important to be educating the folks within your organization on things like basic cyber hygiene and things of that nature. I think this is a piece of that. Having good education and good communication across the board.
Well, yeah, and Paul, you just brought it up as well as you've got this balance now. You're working at home, you got kids at home, you've got to work, they've got to work, and you're also trying to integrate in security into this whole environment. It's challenging, right? And so how do you balance across work and personal life and all the requirements for what the kids need and all these access points, right? It gets a little crazy.
It does. I think also know your culture, right? Both at home and at work as well. For example, in some organizations, setting up a security genius bar, as is recommended, would probably go over pretty well, such as if you worked for Apple, right? In pretty much every other organization, there's going to be a significant number of folks, especially those in the technical parts of your organization, that might poke fun at that. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, see, I equated that to have an open door policy, right?
Yeah, no, that I agree with.
Take it so you can accept feedback. You want feedback coming in from every angle of the organization, every single business unit. And hey, you know what? Reward identification of issues, even if they're false positives, right? I take it as basic as something as a phishing attack or a suspected phishing attack. If somebody raises their hand and says this doesn't look right, but it's legitimate, we still reward that. Thank you for bringing that up. I'd rather have you check to make sure this is legitimate than, you know what I mean? And just double check with us. We're okay with that. So have that level of an open door policy. It doesn't necessarily have to be a genius bar, but just, encourage people to communicate with you.
Well, and I think knowing how to efficiently and effectively triage is important. A lot of those phishing, you're going to have to automate that because otherwise your whole IT staff is going to spend all day, in the extreme case, right, all day long responding to every single phishing, and that may not be exactly what they need to focus on. And as you folks know, and all folks listening, right, that have ever done any kind of investigation into a vulnerability or security incident, it can be a rat hole, right? Especially as we're all not geniuses, right? Which is kind of the point, and we all don't have expertise in every single area. So like today, I'm like teaching myself DOM-based cross-site scripting and how to pull that off. And in some cases, it's really easy. In some cases, not. You start going down a rabbit hole, and you have to watch out that your team doesn't suffer from that all the time because you could lose. Take your eye off the ball. It could be bad.
Oh, 100% agreed. You leverage the technology to gain the efficiencies that you need, But we all know things are going to get through, right? So in those cases where something gets through, I'd rather have somebody raising their hand than not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think this point was also directed at, look, people are in a new environment. They may have some issues connecting to certain services, getting their network to connect to the internet. I mean, there could be lots of particular potential issues, right? And if you have a way for people to ask questions, get answers to their problems, it also not only will create probably a more secure environment, but it also creates a little more empathy dealing with the situation, that you're also trying to benefit the end user here at the end of the day too. I think that was the other point from this this particular Genius Bar item that she laid out. And then the last one was, making sure that employees aren't storing data outside of compliant areas, up in the cloud or a box or whatever. You could see a lot of data movement right now just because people are like, wait, I need access to that data, so I'm going to grab it and I'm going to put it here, but not realizing that that's going to open a security loophole somewhere because maybe that environment that you moved it to isn't secure.
Yeah, right, and that leans back to the education side, right?
Yep.
Proactively offer best practices and those solutions that you have, so that you're preventing shadow IT. Right? Because people are going to try to become as efficient as they possibly can and use whatever tools they have available at their fingertips. But if you're proactively offering that insight into here's the best practice on how to do things and educating folks, they'll use those tools.
And we have, I mean, we make it sound easy here. Our, staff and hosts, right, largely are security professionals. If not, they've been surrounded by security professionals their entire time here at Security Weekly. And so it's just been inherent and baked into the culture that they know how to recognize sensitive data. And because they've asked the question, whether it's one of us, here on staff or other hosts or whoever, to go, wait, how should I securely transmit this data, right? So just embedded in the culture is not putting sensitive data in other areas where it could be exposed to the public. If you hadn't established that culture before this pandemic, you're likely in a world of hurt when it comes to data security, right? If you don't have the right facilities in place and technology solutions in place, you're in trouble. If you didn't do the education piece that Jason talked about, right? You're also in a world of hurt because they may go, oh, I can just put that up on Google Drive or S3 and share it, right? Or just send it in an email with everyone's social security numbers or whatever, right? So, having that inside of your culture, I think, is important. I think it goes back to our previous article of doing the lunch and learns and having open door policies and regular communications and training about what security is and what it means to be secure and how it's. I really think the interview that we did, Matt, I forgot when, but it's about safety, right? And building that safety into your organization the same way you would in workplace safety, and making sure that if there's ice that you're putting salt and sand down and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, you have to make it a little closer to the person so they realize the impact to them, right? It's the heart versus the head kind of discussion that we've
What's
had
in it for me?
times.
What's in it for me?
Yeah, which leads me, it's perfect segue into my next article. Good leadership is about communicating why. I love this article. We talk about this a lot at Security Weekly. The why, the what, the how, right? In the why is so important. And this article really talks about it from a leadership and communication perspective when you're presenting. And it gives you some tips, but I think it's so important for people to understand their why. And I say this to all companies out there. Why do you exist, right? What problem are you solving? They're so fundamental to an organization, to a culture, to anything, right? That I think a lot of us always go to what or how and forget about really articulating and understanding why.
Yeah. And I made that mistake early on in my career, right? I was excited. I'm like, we need to be doing all these things. And, the team would turn to me and like, we don't understand why, right? And that's when I had to make the mistake to really, truly understand that you have to, and I try in very frequent communications to not call them into a long diatribe, right? But help everyone understand why we do things the way we do or why we need to make a change. and the importance and prioritize things, because that's important. Also, very important for your leaders to understand why. If they don't, they can't communicate that to the team, and then you're in a really bad situation.
Right. And we've talked about this before, I think. And for listeners, if you haven't read, Simon Sinek's book, Start with the Why, it's that golden circle, right? The why is your purpose. It's why you're doing what you're doing. It's your mission, right? And then when you talk about the how, it's the process on how you get there. And the what is kind of in that same line, right? It's how you get to that overall purpose. And if people don't understand the destination or the outcome, they're not going to be, all paddling in the same direction. And to be honest with you, it could create assumptions, right? If people don't know the why on why things are occurring, they may not be fully comfortable with it. They may make assumptions, and then that's where adverse communication can be going on, rumors can be going on. So the why is a critical piece of the conversation.
Yeah, and this article gives you like 3 strategies to kind of focus on. Ask some good what questions. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Well, why then do we do those things, right? It kind of helps you get to the why based on some really good what questions. So one of the strategies to really figure out that why is ask a bunch of those what questions, which I thought was an interesting approach, right? Because I always take it from the top, and I think about the problem statement in trying to articulate the why from the top and then get to the what. But in an organization where you know a bunch of the what, if you can ask some really good what questions, hopefully it helps you extract out why you do those to bring that up a level, which I thought was
and
interesting.
the other piece, Matt, that I really liked was state alternate perspectives. Look at it from different perspectives in the organization, so you can better understand and have empathy on the way other people or organizations will feel. And to be honest with you, even if you're having a conversation where it may not, the decision may not be in the benefit of that business unit or that person, at least they know you've thought it through, right? You've thought that situation through, and you're giving them valid reasons as to why you can't go down that path or follow that process or made that decision.
Yeah, this is really difficult, by the way, when you're working with other executives, because each of these executives is going to have their kind of concept on the why.
Yep.
And so if you don't state some of these alternate perspectives, you're going to run into this really interesting roadblock with one of the executives who has a completely different thought process or purview on this. And so if you state them up front, now you can hopefully align them to the main why, maybe, to say it in a better way, than having all these alternate strategies out there.
Yeah. And I think it's critical for leaders, right? I mean, as leaders, it's our job to define the narrative, right? And not allow the narrative to be defined for us. So by going through these exercises and figuring out the why, looking at alternate perspectives, really coming up with that strategy and that communication allows you as a leader to define the narrative.
Yeah, definitely. This next article, when I first pulled it, I'm like, this is a pretty good article. And then I got to number 5, and I'll tell you why I only put 4 of them in here, because then I read number 5 and I went, oh, okay, I can't do that.
So my first note was four priorities, and hey, by the way, check out my product. It's uniquely positioned to save your life.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just the first 4 were great, right? It's the 5 CISO priorities during the COVID-19 response. And I read it, and I read the first 4, and I'm like, good. And I'm like, yeah. And so here they are, so we can talk through them quickly. I mean, these are obvious, right? Secure remote users, identify risk as quickly as possible. You got to work nimbly, and then stay vigilant and educate against new phishing techniques. We've talked about all of this. I think they all make tremendous sense.
Oh, absolutely. And under the secure remote users, a big piece of that came out for me is just coordination between all the teams, right? In order to be successful at that, you're going to have a lot of teams getting together to make that happen. So your IT team, your network operations team, your security team, your app dev team. So it's going to take a village to make that happen. Oh, and hey, by the way, input from the business, right?
Exactly right. Now, the 5th point on here, which I deleted off of this list, was lean on AI. And I'm like, really? And then it was the whole product pitch after that. And that's when I lost interest in the rest of the article.
Literally the first note I took was that, hey, check out my product.
Yeah, and I think that trying to educate your users against new phishing techniques is kind of a cat and mouse game, right? You're just always going to be in. I think it's better to teach them how to combat all types of social engineering attempts, whether those, regardless of the medium, come over and establish really well-defined procedures, especially revolving around financial transactions or anything of the like, personnel data, personnel changes, that type of stuff, is really what's going to make you resilient against at least the business or APT, it gets called, right, style phishing attacks, targeted phishing, spear phishing, right? There's lots of different fancy names for it, but basically have procedures that help you protect your business and your employees, and don't focus too much on, I think there's too much focus on the latest phishing techniques, because there's always going to be the next phishing technique, right? It's not always going to involve email either.
Right. I agree, Paul. That statement should have been stay vigilant and educate, period.
Yeah. Yep, exactly right. So in order to make up for that mistake, I brought in the next link only to give you additional resources that weren't product pitches. So things like how to handle the shift to remote work, the remote playbook, and some of these other things I threw in the next article just so people can go get additional information about those without a product pitch is point number 5.
Yeah.
So
I'll say I love the 6 charts to understand coronavirus's impact on IT. It had a lot of good information on like how CIOs are looking at this and their planned investments, right? I mean, it's pretty crazy that 67% of CFOs say they plan to defer or cancel their planned investments, IT investments, which I mean, that number is just staggering.
It is staggering, right? Which is why I brought in that last article that talks through worldwide IT spending expected to decline 5.1% in 2020. That also means there's probably going to be some corollary decrease in spending against cybersecurity because we're usually attached to a portion of that IT security budget. So a little scary when we think about what's happening from a budgeting perspective and where investment's going to happen for the rest of this year.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, they did come out in this article with one little bright spot, and it says, IT infrastructure spending is still projected to grow overall by almost 4%. But if you dig into that portion of the article, it's really cloud-based infrastructure, right? So it's X as a service. So that's really where where that article focused on was the cloud-based infrastructure versus on-prem boxes, right?
Yeah, and I think we're going to see some of that trend because you're seeing telecommunications and some of those other investments going down. You're seeing some shifts from on-prem to cloud. So as on-prem declines, you're getting some offset on cloud, but still, we have a lot of on-prem systems out there that have to be secured. Decrease in spending on those systems are not going to help us in the long term.
No, not at all. And they're not going to help a migration plan off of them.
But I think there's going to be an uptick in cloud security spending. And that's a very broad, arena to play in, right? But as we've been talking to our sponsors and analyzing the industry, right, as we move stuff to any aspect of the cloud, security is slightly different and requires different tools, tactics, and techniques to be able to attack and secure. And I think we're going to see that trend continue both from the attack side and from the defender side. You're going to need different resources, right? So maybe you're not, buying that big ASA firewall, right? But you're doing some other kind of spend because now those services are distributed in the cloud in 8 different ways. And how do I secure that, right?
Look, I've been saying this for a long time, Paul, as you know, app user data, right?
Identity,
application, identity, and data security transcend any of the infrastructures we deploy to, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. And as things shift, my big recommendation for organizations is how much are you spending on application, user identity, and data security? Because those investments transcend regardless of where these apps run in the environment. It could be on-prem or in the cloud. And I think that shift is going to come to reality very quickly after we're out of this pandemic.
Yeah, and I saw some articles that were like, passwordless vendors and spend is up. And largely, I think we can tie that to a lot of discussions we had in this show, right? Rather than my asset sitting somewhere in the data center and there's this firewalls and rules around it that say, well, only the internal machines can access them. We didn't have to validate users' identity as much as, well, now it's up on the internet and anyone can connect to it. And do we want the users entering passwords, and how do we validate who they are, right? Becomes way more important on the identity and authentication front. So I think there's going to be a very much an uptick in those technologies.
Yeah. And that's where I'd like to see some investments in the cybersecurity environment shift too. But again, we're dealing with infrastructure moves and potentially declines in certain spending areas. So it's going to be an interesting time, I think, for CISOs and other folks in the security industry.
For sure.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. And we'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.